How you choose to live your 20s will define a lot about how the rest of your life goes. Hi, welcome to episode 8 of Backs of All Trades podcast. And as you can see, I'm in a different location. I'm actually traveling right now back home to my hometown of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I grew up here for my first 18 years. Those are the Sandia Mountains behind me. And so I figured while I'm here, might as well record an episode actually, outside in the beautiful nature. That's one thing that Albuquerque is well known for. And it's kind of on topic with this episode, which I'm going to be talking about essentially your 20s and how to live in your 20s and balancing, becoming super successful while also enjoying life in your 20s, and somewhat also on brand as recently, as in literally last Friday, I got promoted at my day job. So obviously this is what I do for fun as a hobby, but I am a software engineer in my day job, and I was promoted to senior software engineer, and I'm only 23 years old. And so when you talk about, setting up your life in your 20s, then you talk about like traveling, as I am now, to Albuquerque, and you also talk about building your career. So let's get right into the episode. And I want to sort of frame this because I think a lot of people have it wrong when it comes to most things, and they don't apply nuance to anything, right? It's black and white. It has to be one extreme or the other extreme. And the two extremes when it comes about how to live in your 20s or what you should do in your 20s is essentially, should you live every day like it's your last, right? That you're only going to be this young forever, which is absolutely true. So you may as well, spend all the money that you have in your 20s and don't worry so much about like preparing for the future because, no tomorrow isn't guaranteed. So you should live to the fullest every single day. And again, I think this is a little bit problematic because there is a very, very good chance that you will live to be 30, 40, 50, and even in your 60s. And so you simply cannot indulge in immediate gratification every single day, right? Because tomorrow isn't guaranteed, but it's probably going to happen. And I think that a lot of people will not really get their life together in their 20s, and I'll go into why that's so important, and therefore will go to 30, will go to 40, and still not really have any semblance of their life together because they didn't put that work in their 20s. There's the problem on the other side, which is that if you think that in your 20s you have to grind nonstop, right? That 20s are a time for building and you shouldn't even take a little bit of a break. Well, you are only going to be this young forever, and there's a lot of stuff that really you can only do in your 20s, or really only before you have responsibilities, right? Once you have a family, you have a wife or a husband and kids, your life looks very different. And so if you just kind of work away your 20s, you can miss out on a lot of experiences that you can only get at certain times in your life. So like with everything, I think that there is a balance that you want to find. And I think that's where a lot of people, they don't have nuance. And so I'm going to literally in this episode go through a lot of different topics in my hometown of Albuquerque. And I am going to talk about essentially, my opinion on what you should do in your 20s on these different topics, right? So the frame of the episode is really that it's all about balance, right? So the first topic I'm going to talk about is your health, because in your 20s, you can make some decisions. What's different about your 20s versus your teenage years is that in your teenage years, you're kind of healthy by default, even, your childhood as well. Up until your 20s, you're kind of healthy by default. Unless you have some very extenuating circumstances, you're going to be fine. Your 20s, that's still kind of true when it comes to, but your metabolism may start slowing down. You might start, seeing a toll of stuff that you did in your teenage years, whether it's you've been really rough on your joints or lifting too heavy, whatever it is. And really what you do in your 20s can play what I will call health dividends for decades in the future. And so if you build a workout routine in your 20s that you stick to it, there's a lot of science to show that you will literally be healthier in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. If you do not choose to work out, stuff like your bone density, you'll actually have muscle atrophy and stuff as you get older and older. But if you build the habits in your 20s, it will pay so many dividends later in life that I think that you should not sacrifice, your health in your 20s. This is the time when it's actually worth paying attention to it. So you need to go to the gym. right? Do something athletic, right? You don't have to lift weights, but it could be running, swimming, playing tennis, but don't just sit on your butt all day in your 20s because you are healthy now. That won't be true forever. And building the habits now is good. Eat well. I think this is another one to where you can kind of eat like a child, right? That's where that phrase comes from when you're younger. And you might start gaining weight that you didn't gain before in your 20s. And it's a lot harder. The longer you wait, it's harder to lose the weight. It's harder to build the muscle. Do it early. So eat well. Find a diet that works for you. Don't do like crash diets, but, you know, educate yourself on nutrition, educate yourself on macros and micros and having something that will work for you long term. This is something I put an investment in very early. And so I've got both a routine, like a lifting regimen, and a diet that I know works for me that I will literally be able to do for decades. And I don't even have to think about it anymore. And now think about once life gets really, really complicated. You've got a job, a career, your family. Getting that in order, your health in order after that becomes incredibly more difficult. The next thing I'm going to talk about is drinking and partying in your 20s. I think that this is a big question, right? Because so many people, when they're young, that's when they do socialize a lot. They go to parties, they'll be drinking. And what's the opinion on it, right? Because there's the two ethoses again, right? There's the, oh, you should not party ever because, you haven't earned it yet. And I'll go into that a little bit later. And then there's the side of, oh, well, this is the time to enjoy life and to actually like party and all those things. So what's my personal opinion? I mean, alcohol is really, really bad for you. This is known fact. There's even been new studies coming out where things that we used to thought were healthy, oh, moderate drinking is fine. Or people used to think even like a glass of red wine was good for you, right? That's not true. Any alcohol is bad for you and actually really bad for you. However, a lot of things are bad for you, right? And if you do literally everything purely based on health and purely based on living longer, in my opinion, that's no life to live either. So once again, it's about the balance, understanding that yes, it will affect your health negatively. There's ways to sort of combat that, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't engage in any activity that can be remotely detrimental to your health, because life is about sacrifices and choosing here so that you get more fulfillment there. There's a guy, I don't know if you guys know who Brian Johnson is. He's a multi-millionaire, founded a company, and he's doing something now which he calls the blueprint, which is essentially he's trying to do everything in his power to live as long as possible, which is super kind of cool to look at, but it looks miserable to live, in my personal opinion. Like, he does literally everything based on living longer, and that's not fulfilling to me. Like, imagine waking up and you're thinking about your own death all day and you're just trying to prevent that from happening. It's like, is that really a life to live? Personally, I don't think so. And so, yeah, I think that there's a balance of saying, hey, I'm going to socialize, I'm going to party, I might engage in drinking sometimes, but hopefully it's not every day, right? I was someone who enjoyed partying quite a bit in college. I don't do it at the same frequency now because I understand that there are different priorities I have. But nevertheless, like while I was here, I drank with some friends while I'm in my hometown. My general rule of thumb when it comes to alcohol now is if it's going to enhance the experience, then I will partake in it. But if it's something where it is the experience, right? When you think about like going to a bar in college, that kind of is the experience. Drinking is the fundamental thing of the event, and the social stuff is outside of it. I prefer now to do the converse of it, which is like, hey, I'm in good company, I'm enjoying myself, and I think that alcohol might elevate this a little bit. That's my personal opinion. Because I think when you're someone who goes through their 20s, like your mid-20s, and if you're someone who's still drinking really, really heavily and multiple times a week, even like blacking out, that's sort of an admittance that you feel like your life isn't worth living. And so you are choosing to escape it. You're actually numbing yourself, right? People talk about alcohol. You can use it as almost a prescription, like a self-prescribed way to, hey, this is going to make my life more bearable. I don't think that's a good use of alcohol. I know for a fact that's not a good use of alcohol. But like I said, not totally against it, not totally for it. Partying, same thing. Like, you should, if it's at the expense of actually moving your career forward, probably shouldn't do it, but you shouldn't avoid it entirely either. This kind of goes into the next one, which is another way to sort of make your life, quote unquote, more bearable, which is video games and TV. I think that a lot of people play way, way, way too many video games, and from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, they're either watching Netflix or playing video games. And this is a way to just almost pass the time of your life, which is not great. right? Because at that point, you're not doing anything actually productive. And I do think that there's a lot you can do in your 20s to set yourself up for the future, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And so really, video games and TV are not moving that forward at all, right? There's no argument that watching Friends for the 4th time is actually improving your life. So do it in moderation. But at the same time, if you enjoy playing video games, I think there's this ethos or this the grind culture, right, that we see on the internet these days, that essentially anytime you're not being productive, you should be being productive. And so playing video games falls into the non-productive category. So people are like, oh, you'll never be successful. You'll never become a millionaire if you play video games, which of course is bogus. That's not true at all. It's about moderation and making sure that it's you can do both, right? There are very successful people who play video games, who played video games. Of course, there are sacrifices in literally everything, but people these days, they take too far of an extreme and think you have to never play video games if you want to be successful. Or there are people who just play video games all day. Don't be that person either. So the way I actually say it is like, if you do nothing but play video games, you're not going to be successful, right? But at the same time, if you restrict yourself from doing anything that you enjoy, you also won't be successful, because there is a very real component of de-stressing and of having essentially a reset on your mental strain. And if you are just grind 24 hours a day for years and years, you can't keep that up and your productivity will go down. And doing something like playing video games or something that you can enjoy can actually improve your productivity. It's about finding the balance. Really quickly, if you're enjoying this episode on living in your 20s, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, as it really helps me out with the algorithm. And if you're listening on any podcast platform, please give me 5 stars. Now let's get back into the episode. Going into the next category here is making money and like grinding, right? What are your 20s for? And I want to caution people, and first of all say that trying to make as much money as possible in your 20s can actually be somewhat counterproductive, because in many cases, you will think about like a doctor, right? A doctor makes no money in their 20s, but then makes a ton of money in their 30s. That's an extreme example. But just trying to get the dollar now is actually not necessarily going to give you the best outcome financially in the long run. I'm not saying that's always the case, but if you're just trying to get a quick buck here, a quick buck there, for example, foregoing education because you think, oh, I can make more money doing something else, drop shipping, whatever, that's not always the case. And you actually would be more beneficial investing in a relationship, with a mentor or somebody and doing it for free, right? This is something that I think some of even the hustle people talk about with Gary Vee, like, oh, I'll work for free for somebody for a while, right? There's some truth to that. My point being, just trying to make a lot of money, not always the best in the long term. But I want to talk more about the people who think that the 20s are the time for like building and grinding. And if you do nothing, like literally nothing but grind in your 20s, and even let's say you do become successful, you wake up and you're 30 and you're very successful, you're probably going to regret it, because there is a truth to your 20s being essentially it's the youngest time you'll ever be, but also it's the time when you're an actual adult. You're your own entity. Under 20, you're kind of under supervision of your parents. And so once you're 20, you can make your own decisions, especially if you're making your own money. And so you can start figuring out, what do I like? What fulfills me? And if you just forego that and say, no, I'm just going to grind, and then, wake up when I'm 30 and be a multimillionaire, I think that you'll regret it. I think that you shouldn't have to sacrifice a decade of your life. And I don't think you do have to. So then the question is like, when do you enjoy the fruits of your labor? I don't think you have to wait until you're 30. And I'll go into that a little bit later. But the converse, again, as I keep flipping back and forth, is that if you don't do anything to set up your life in your 20s, then it's going to be very difficult to become very successful. These are people who essentially spend the entire time trying to either find things that are fulfilling or partying or doing stuff that they find enjoyment from in the moment. And so they don't set up their life at all, whether that's a career, whether that's education. And they don't really know what they want to do even by like 30 years old. And it's not too late, but here's the thing. It's going to be very, very difficult to turn your life around once you have responsibilities or people caring for you, right? If you have a significant other who's dependent on you, or a wife or kids, then you can't really take the risks anymore. And so in your 20s, you have the widest band of the highest highs and the lowest lows of where you can go in terms of your potential. And you obviously want to try and capitalize on that. And I think as you get older and the responsibilities tack on, that band becomes narrower and narrower. And so it's unlikely that you'll become, a multi-millionaire if on the day that you're 30, you don't have a lot of things going for you. And so you can set up that trajectory in your 20s, which is essentially what I'm indicating to do. And don't purely use your 20s as a time to enjoy life. Again, finding a balance, right? The next thing I want to talk about is essentially like spending money versus investing. I've talked about this, by the way, in my whole video dedicated to personal finance. That's episode 5, I believe, maybe 6. Regardless, there's a balance here too, where a lot of people think like, oh, for example, I make a lot of money for my age. I'm aware of that. And I have found a balance of being able to do fun stuff like paying to go travel and come to I'm going on a few more trips before the end of the year, right? And I'm blessed enough that my job is flexible enough for me to do that. But doing that while still investing aggressively for my future. And depending on how much money you make, the trade-offs there, or like balancing both, can be a little bit more difficult, and maybe you'll have to take a little bit less trips or invest a little bit more. But my point being, you don't want to do it entirely one or the other. I know people, for example, I'm not a big fan of the FIRE movement. Those who know the FIRE movement is financial independence, retire early. And these people essentially try and save literally like 80-90% of what they make, and they live so frugally that it's not really fun, in my opinion. Who cares if you retire at 45? If you're now 45 and you have to live on $80K a year from your investments and you haven't done any cool trips or anything like that, right? And so I think that, you should both invest for the future, which is what I do, and while still being able to enjoy enough of it now that it's actually, you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. If you spend all of your money now, then you aren't essentially preparing for retirement. And as I mentioned earlier, you will most likely will be alive towards the retirement age. It's something like a 90% chance you'll be alive to take money out of your 401k, for example. And so do both. It's not one or the other. And I personally tend to spend most of my money on experiences, right? Experiences versus things. I think that traveling is one of the most rewarding things that humans can do. I think nobody regrets traveling, especially when they're young, when you're nimble and you can go on long flights and you can fly coach and not really care, right? And I think that you get exposure to different cultures. It's sort of the experiences versus things debate. When you die, you'll remember your experiences. You won't remember the new car that you had when you were 22, but you may remember if you went to Southeast Asia for a couple weeks, right? The next thing I want to talk about in your 20s, and this is a big one that I see online, is should you be in a relationship, especially as a man? Because I know most of my audience is men, and obviously I'm a man, and there's very conflicting ideologies here. Essentially, a lot of people seem to indicate that you should not be in a relationship when you're in your 20s as a man, because you should be building your life instead, and almost that the relationship will detract you from your path of becoming super successful. And I don't really agree with this, right? I think that it's not a distraction. This is something I actually changed my mind on recently, but I don't think that dating is a distraction. I think that if you do it right and you find the right partner, that you will essentially be actually able to progress your life further and faster than if you were not in a relationship. And so it's not like because I have a girlfriend, I am going to be more complacent and not focus on my grind as much, right? I think you can do both. And I think that there are some trade-offs, right? You will spend time with another human being that could have been spent on the other things, whether it is your career or whatever. But like I said earlier, if you do everything purely just trying to grind, I think that you'll regret it. And dating is a skill, just like anything else, just like making money, just like going to the gym, just like playing a sport. Dating is a skill. And I don't know where a lot of guys have the ego that they think that once they become, super successful and rich, then all of a sudden they'll be able to have the partner of their dreams. It's almost, they'll just pivot their path and be like, now it's time to be a good boyfriend, good husband. If you have no practice doing that, being a good partner, you're not going to be good at it. It takes practice. And so I think that building that skill is arguably just as important as building your career in your 20s. Because once you are successful, it might be someone you met in your 20s, it might be someone you meet in your 30s, but if you have been a good partner to somebody, and if you've had a dating, past, it'll be much easier for you to know what you like, what you don't like, how to handle a healthy relationship, how to communicate in a relationship, and when problems arise, how to deal with those. And if you've never done that before, I don't care how rich you are, I don't care how hot she is, right? Then you will not be as fulfilled than if you did that work in your 20s. And so I think that, I'm not telling you to go out and date and force to date. I'm just sort of combating the ideal that, the idea that being in a relationship somehow will make you less successful, especially in your 20s. It's not like you should do one, then the other. I think you can do both in parallel. Obviously, the opposite is still possible. There are people who get in a relationship and become hyper complacent, stop going to the gym, stop making money, right? Even maybe lose their job, not really care, right? That's obviously terrible too. If someone is making your life worse or making your life too easy, then you shouldn't be in that relationship either, right? So if you have a girlfriend and all of a sudden you're like, I don't need to become rich. If you had previous thoughts of being rich, then no, that's not good either. You should go into a relationship and keep all of your aspirations. And hopefully, in my case, I look for somebody who has similar aspirations, or at least is complementary aspirations. That way there is no chance of them detracting me from my goals. And yeah, I think that one's not as popular when it comes to, I think most people think that, you have a girlfriend, then you're not going to become rich anymore, which I think is absolute crap. I see that online all the time. This all can be kind of summed up to the following, right? This is number 7, but you can have it all, just not at the same time. Every decision you make, there was a decision that you didn't make, right? There's sacrifices in all of it. And I think that you cannot paint such a broad stroke to the extremes. If I were to sum it up into 2 categories again, it's, are the 20s a time for enjoying life and nothing else? Or are they a time for building so that your 30s and beyond are super successful? I think it's neither of those. It's a mix of both, as always. And so nobody has it figured out, right? I don't even have it figured out. I'm making this video kind of talking to myself, but also, I think you need to live your life and find fulfillment in different things and readjust, right? You need to be able to say, okay, that wasn't working. Now I'm going to pivot. And, your 20s are incredibly important. I personally do struggle a lot with the sort of should I be doing more right now? Whether it is going and literally hanging out with friends or just sitting on my phone watching a TikTok, and I feel guilty, right? Oh, I should be doing more. I should be grinding. And to a degree, that can be helpful if you're not doing anything. But it can also be incredibly toxic, because what are you working towards, right? If you really think about what is the goal of grinding and becoming super successful in your 20s? What is the fun that you're working towards? Well, I think most people would say so I can do really cool experiences with my friends or family in really cool places. And if you make enough money, personally I do now, I don't have to wait. Right? What am I waiting? Why am I waiting to do that? Why do I need to become X, dollars or X title in order for me to start having that fun when I can do it now? You can do it intersparingly, right? This is what he's talked about a lot in the 4-Hour Work Week, but he calls it the micro retirements. But there's some truth to it, which is that you should be able to enjoy your life while still building it for the future. And that's the whole topic of this episode. I think that's what your 20s are for. You shouldn't be super complacent, but you also shouldn't be so set on grinding all day that you never enjoy life, right? You should enjoy your 20s, especially if you're a young professional like me and making good money. Then enjoy it while still preparing for the future, while still on an upwards trajectory. Always be trying to be on an upwards trajectory so that when I am 30, 40, hopefully my life is easy, right? Because I've done the work in my 20s, but I still enjoyed it and I don't regret a second of it. This has been a bit of a shorter episode, but I want to sort of wrap it up and just say how thankful I am for the life I've been given. I want to continue working hard. Like I said, I just got promoted, so I'm going to continue working on my career, continue working on putting out content for you guys. I want you to be on the lookout. I'm going to start doing some guest episodes, which I'm super excited about. I've already got booked a number of guests, and this is what I love to do. I'm excited to actually have conversations with other people. If you guys have specific topics that you'd like to hear me talk about, please let me know. And if you have any questions about Albuquerque, let me know, because this is where I grew up. And other than that, if you're on YouTube, make sure to subscribe, comment below. It really helps me out with the algorithm. And if you're on any podcast platform, please give me 5 stars. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.